Hey everybody, Dr. Melissa Robinson-Winemiller here again, talking about all things leadership and empathy, how that relates to emotional intelligence and how we can use it to supercharge our leaders for better profit, productivity, and innovation. I want to take a moment today and talk about something that kind of sneaks in along the back that many of us as leaders don't even realize is happening, but is kind of the anti-empathy. When we think of empathy, what we're doing is relating to people one-on-one, person to person. That's why if we can actionably use empathy to relate to other people, we can then grab our emotional intelligence skills and use them effectively. And why sometimes people who maybe have very good emotional intelligence skills don't use them very well because they haven't used the empathy to connect with the people one-on-one first. If you think about what the exact opposite of this would be, it would be instead of thinking of people one-on-one as people, to think of them as groups or categories so that any single human kind of gets ignored, becomes invisible. It's the forest, you don't see the trees. There is a name for this, and I don't really like to use it because I think it's too supercharged. We use it too much, so it kind of loses meaning, but that would be stereotyping. Now, the reason why I bring this up today is because I know that for me and for other leaders, this is kind of an insidious thing that can creep in the back door. If you think of our human brains, right? Our heads are bigger in proportion to the rest of our body compared to other primates and other mammals. Our brain takes a lot of calories and energy to be able to use. Infants take longer to grow up with humans because that brain has to develop, and sometimes it still isn't developed until into the 20s. Our human brains are one of the things that set us apart, but it's also one of the things that can hold us back if we don't really understand how it works. Because our brains use so much energy, it can do things to try and create mental shortcuts, right? Because that way it doesn't need to expend all those calories trying to figure out the same problem through all the steps over and over again. Instead, it looks for patterns and it tries to make these problems smaller. So instead of jumping from A to B to C to D to E, it jumps from A to E. One of these things is stereotyping. It's just easier for our brains to be able to place a judgment on a person or a group of people based on characteristics that we can pick up easily. And because it's just something that our brains do, it can be very hard to catch when it happens. So let's talk a little bit about what actually happens inside the human mind when we stereotype. Because if we know what's happening, then we can be aware of it. And as leaders, this is really important because we can do things without realizing we're doing things that can undermine what we're trying to do. Stereotyping, basically 4 things happen within our minds. The first is called compression. Now, what this means is we look at a group of people that are tied together by some kind of trait. Maybe it's gender, maybe it's religion, maybe it's race. It could really be anything. But instead of treating them as more alike with us than they are, we compress these into a narrow band of traits and say, that's it. All these people are alike. We're treating them all as alike, even though they're not. A big example of this that's happening right now is generational friction. How many times have you heard all boomers are the same? All millennials are the same. All of Gen Z is lazy and they don't do anything. All of Gen X are slackers. That's not true. You can't say that every single person in this group has this one set of traits. We've compressed those members into a single group that's very, very narrow. So that's the first thing that happens. After we compress these people into this group, this causes amplification. Now what this means are these little bits that we think about them, like all Gen Z is lazy, all boomers rage, and we amplify them. So they suddenly become more important than any of the other traits that these people might bring to the table, right? I can't hire any Gen Zs because they're all lazy and that's all they are. I can't get anything else out of them. You've compressed them into a group, and now you've amplified those negative traits so that they completely overshadow anything else that could be positive. And let's be real, the reverse is probably true. Any group of people are going to be very different individuals, depending on their background, depending on their experience, depending on their age. To say all, one size never fits all. So we've compressed and we've amplified. The next thing that happens, and this happens naturally, so when I say this word, don't automatically assume that it's always negative. In this case it is, but not if we can actually fight against it and understand what we're doing. We as people naturally discriminate. All that means is we favor certain categories over others. If you say you have discriminatory taste, back in the day, granted 50, 60, 70 years ago, it meant that you had a taste for expensive things, that you discriminated between, the cheap things that were out in the world or fine and expensive things. You're favoring certain categories over others. If you're favoring those categories based on compression and amplification, that's when there's a problem. Plus, frankly, you probably can't discriminate an entire category. People are just too different. Once those three things happen, the compression, the amplification, the discrimination, we fossilize these categories, which means we treat them like they're unchangeable. All of the people that fall in this category is exactly like that. They have always been like that. They will always be like that. So you can just figure they're all going to be exactly like that. It doesn't matter what group you're talking about. I don't even want to name a group because it doesn't hold true. But once you have these other things happening, you fossilize those categories. And now it's held in your brain as a rule that is true forever. So let's go back and look at this one more time just so that we have it straight. The first thing that happens in the brain without you knowing is the members are compressed into a smaller version of themselves. Like they are all alike in some way. That compression is then amplified. So the differences between members of different categories are pushed forward as opposed to the different things that make them human. At that point, now that you've got categories, you favor certain categories over others, which is discrimination. And now that these categories are separated out, we fossilize them. It's going to be this way forever. That's it. So what exactly is the antidote to this? Because the problem with this categorization and fossilization is that it introduces bias. Not only do we know this is here, we've compressed it, we've amplified it, we're discriminating, and we've fossilized it into something that's real, or we think is real, and unchangeable, but now we're going to choose one group over the other based on these traits that aren't actually real to begin with. How do we fight against this? When we use empathy, we reach out to people on a person-to-person basis. We understand them as an individual. There's nothing to compress because we're looking at the one instead of looking at the many and trying to push it into a one. We understand that everybody is going to be different. They're going to have different experiences. They're going to have different expectations. They're going to have different expertise. And this is important because that's where we get away from stereotyping. If we pay attention to people one-on-one, we can't put them in a box with everybody else that falls into that same category. Now, why is this important? There was a book published by Scott Page called The Diversity Bonus. And he was talking about being able to bring in different groups and different people and create teams out of people with many different paths. Sometimes stereotypes keeps us from doing. But the point of the book wasn't that we were looking for different categories to fill different quotas, but rather that what we needed was diversity of thought. And that people that came from different cultures, people that came from different backgrounds, people that came from different gender identities, these people could bring that diversity of thought. They had different points of view, they had different ideas, and that's where we were really able to take these collaborative teams and grow them into something really special. And as a nice sideline, people weren't stereotyped for something that really didn't define them at all. It's a way of being able to reach beyond what our brains automatically do. Unfortunately, to a certain degree, we're still slave to some of these biological things like our brains, just because they take so much energy. They're a huge asset, but they can also cause a lot of trouble. So being able to create this cognitive diversity, this diversity of thinking, that's where we really begin to pull the greatest and the best out of our teams. If as leaders, we look at people one-on-one and don't let them get lost in the crowd, that's when we're actually able to create these super teams. Now, this is where I would have a leader tell me, and I have had leader tell me, I don't have time to know everybody in my organization. I can't be out there and just meeting everybody. I need to be in my office doing X and Y and Z. And that's legitimate. As a leader, you have a lot to do. And that's true. However, do you really have so much to do that you don't want to know the great minds that are working for you? This leader who said that does employee forums quarterly. She has an opportunity to meet employees. It's not like she has to go and be the most friendly leader in the world and give them hours and hours and hours. But if she's calling this forum together anyway, why not take a moment to meet her people? Why not take just a second to see who the actual faces are in the group so that she can humanize them and not just think of them as a category or a pay grade or a job title? If we all come from different backgrounds and have different experiences and paths, we can bring that together to create more innovation. People are going to come at problems from a different direction. Knowing who these people are and actually being able to relate to them one-on-one allows for that forward progress and greater outcomes because we relate to each other as humans. If we continue to stereotype. Last week we talked about two of the most important things you can do as a leader is to know what kind of leader you are and what kind of leader you want to be. If you've taken the moment with self-empathy and really dug in to say, is this something I do? Is this something that my organization does? Allowing for this kind of stereotyping, even if it's completely unintentional. And is this what we want to do? And you want to be a better leader, really understanding who you are and where your boundaries are, that you're not going to allow your brain to do this to you. This sets a business case for why. Having all these different thoughts coming in, this diversity, cognitive diversity, creates better innovation. Having different people looking at the same problem from different angles can create better productivity, better insight to how things get done. That human-to-human connection between the leaders and these people creates trust, which means these people are willing to come forward and talk about it. So you've got the best of both worlds by being in contact with your people. You're creating cognitive diversity, and you've created an atmosphere where they can come to you with it. At the very least, at the bottom, cognitive diversity shows improved problem-solving capability, exponentially better innovation because all these different people are coming at these problems from different angles, and more accurate predictive ability. Because people are coming from all these different paths and have all this different experience about how things could happen or have happened, they can predict better what could happen. That's the whole point of data. That's the whole point of metrics. We look at how things have been done so we can try and predict how they're going to happen. Having that cognitive diversity just puts a fine point on it. So let's take a moment and actually apply this to some of the generational friction that's going on. And I see it coming from all sides. There's the boomers that are old and stodgy and set in their ways and fossilized themselves. There's Gen X that's supposed to be just checked out and bitter. There's the Millennials who are tired of being made fun of for avocado toast, since the entire generation doesn't actually have anything to do with that. There's the Gen Z who are all lazy and crazy and don't know how to act in the workforce and have no interpersonal skills. And there's the alphas that are on their way up that we haven't really talked about much at all because they haven't really hit the workforce en masse yet, but they're coming. This fossilization of these traits has caused a lot of headbutting between these different generations. And unfortunately, because people are so stuck in their ways that this is how these people are, they're not taking the time to understand them. A lot of this generational friction, according to research, goes back to technology. Boomers were the first generation to actually have the computer. There really wasn't anything like that before. And the first time they saw the power that a computer had, it blew people away and realized that these computers were the size of an entire room, sometimes a building. They've been on the technology wave from the very beginning, and it's impressive that they've managed to drive it and still stay on top of that wave. Gen X is the first generation that straddles both lines. I mean, the memes make fun of it, how we can program a VCR and yet still be able to use Python. I am a Gen X, but that's kind of true. So we've seen all this really come into serious power during our lifetime, and we're still working, so this is still happening. Millennials are the first one to not know what it's like to not have the internet, and Gen Z doesn't know what it's like not to have a power computer, known as a phone, in their pocket. We have all come to technology from very, very different paths. And because of that, we have a much different relationship with it. And if there's one thing that our workforce really relies on, it's technology. And now with the addition of AI, we're relying on it even more. Each of these generations come from a different background to technology. The cognitive diversity that's there just regarding technology is massive. So by categorizing each of these, amplifying the traits that we don't like, fossilizing them, and being biased because of them, we are missing out. There's cognitive diversity right there. So instead of looking at each other and pointing fingers and I won't hire this person because they're part of this category, instead take the time to understand who that person is underneath. If they don't have all the necessary skills, understand that nobody has all the necessary skills. And is this something that perhaps someone is willing to teach? or help them with. Most people want to be helped. Not everybody, but it's not everybody in a generation. It's not everybody in all of us. I hope that this little discussion on stereotyping just kind of made it a little bit clearer, because it is one of those things that happens naturally. Just like bias, we just do it. We drag it along with us. We can't help it. But if it's something we can be aware of, we can help mitigate it and create better circumstances for everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Please like and subscribe, comment. I'm looking forward to seeing you with our guests next week, talking about all things empathy and leadership. And until then, thanks so much.